Number 1. Summer Camp. When I was younger, I only went to summer camp one time, and for the most part it was not a bad experience at all. However, there was one thing that made it more memorable than anything else. I was 12 or 13 at the time. It was a while ago, and my birthday was in the summertime, so that is why I cannot remember exactly. But I guess it doesn't matter. It just gives you a bit of an idea of what I was like by knowing how young I was. I was sort of a medium popular kid in school. I wasn't bullied or anything like that. I played sports, but I wasn't great at it. I wasn't really popular, so you might just think I was sort of in between the popular and unpopular kids. This didn't even matter at camp, though. I didn't know anyone at all who was there. But I preferred that. It was more interesting to meet new people. Anyway, there were several cabins on one side of the camp for all the boy campers. The girl cabins were on the other side of the camp. Kind of funny when you think about it, but I figured they thought there was less of a chance of anything going on if the boys and girls were kept far away from each other at night time. I got to my cabin early enough that I was able to pick out my own bed. I chose the top bunk that was at the back of the room. I also chose the top bunk because there was a window by it. I figured if I was having problems sleeping, and I knew that it was quite likely that I was going to, I would be able to entertain myself by staring out the window. The window faced away from the camp and into the forest. The first night that I was there, I noticed something even more interesting about the bed I chose. There was a light in the back of the cabin that shined into the space between the back of the cabin and the trees. It didn't shine at the cabin, so it didn't pose a problem of keeping me awake, but it added an almost spooky atmosphere the way it shined into the forest. A lot of time passed in camp without anything strange happening. I got to do all the really fun things a kid can do at camp, and there were a few boring things too. I also made some friends, which was something I was pretty happy about, and surprisingly the food was actually pretty good too. I did have a lot of problem going to sleep though. It is just one of those things where it is hard to sleep in a bed that isn't my own. I still get it to this very day. In fact, living in hotels is very hard for me, and even after being there for a few weeks, I hadn't really gotten used to sleeping in that bed. Anyway, a few weeks into my camp, I was laying in my bed. I was listening to the other boys in the room snoring. I was certain that everyone was asleep other than me, so I just lay there on my back, staring out the window. I was sitting there for who knows how long. Well, actually, lying on my back. Then there was some movement that caught my eye. One of the camp counselors, a teenager who was in charge of one of the other cabins, was walking around the corner of my cabin. He was a tall, strong guy. If I remember correctly, he also played baseball and football in his high school. The counselor was walking around, looking for something. He had a flashlight and he kept shining it into the forest. I heard him talking a little too, but it wasn't really loud enough to make out what he was saying. And suddenly, I jumped up in my bed as I saw something I had not expected. A big man jumped out of the trees and quickly tackled the counselor to the ground. He was much bigger than the counselor and was hitting him as the counselor fell to the ground. I screamed. Really, it was the first and last time in my life that I spontaneously screamed, and of course, that woke up nearly everyone in the cabin. My counselor ran over to me, and in the middle of asking me what was wrong, he looked out the window and saw it. Telling us all to remain in the cabin, he ran out to try and help the other counselor. Well, this was a cabin with about 12 teenage country boys in it. There was really little to no chance they were going to remain in the cabin when they figured out what was happening, and they didn't. Most of them ran outside. I didn't. I continued to watch everything from the window, and although the second counselor wasn't able to overpower the man, a few of the older boys in the cabin were able to eventually, with the help of the second counselor, pull the guy off. There was some sort of noise horns going off or something like that. It was a really strange atmosphere. The other campers were trying to beat the big guy, but eventually other counselors showed up, and the guy was subdued. The man was a guy who had a warrant out for his arrest for a violent crime. He'd been hiding out by the river that the camp was on. I guess he'd come close to the camp at night, looking to get some food, but the counselor had noticed something going on. Like me, he had problems sleeping away from his own home. Although the story ended up with a good ending, it haunted me for the longest time. Seeing that man jump out of nowhere like he did was terrifying. Pubescent boys, simmering with testosterone, might be kind of annoying sometimes, but hey, they helped that counselor out, so it was a good ending. Number 2. By the Fire. This is a weird story. It happened when I was out on a camping trip by myself. I've been camping by myself for as long as I can remember. Just to give you a bit of an idea, I am an only child. I grew up out in the country. Although I had plenty of cousins, we didn't live very close to each other. But I always liked camping, so I began camping out by myself quite a bit. I never had any strange or really scary experiences when I was younger in camping. I wasn't scared of the dark, and I was never afraid when I was out camping on my own. I always felt like I was safe in the environment that I was comfortable in. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the camping trip, just to take up space though. I will give you a little bit of background though. This happened when I was 25 years old. I was taking a week-long camping trip in the summer. The place that I was camping in was not an official campground. It was in the hills behind the property that one of my aunts lived on, so technically I was not supposed to be there. I was camped out in a very good spot on a hill. I could go downhill to a creek in order to get water, but I liked being up on the hill because it was high and I had a really good view. I kept a fire burning at all times. It was necessary, of course. If you've been camping for a decent period of time, you would know how important a fire can be. I was sleeping, and not really sure what time it was. When I opened my eyes, it was still very dark around me. There was light, but it was coming from outside of the tent, and it was by my fire. I looked around, trying to figure out what had woke me up. Normally I can sleep through anything. And that's when I noticed the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life. The fire illuminated a wall of the tent, but it also revealed something else. It showed me a shadow. It was the shadow of a large man who was sitting by my fire. I felt a jolt or sort of jarring feeling, and I just barely kept myself from making a noise. This was a weird and unprecedented event, and I really had no idea how I should react. I decided the smartest thing to do was to not call attention to the fact that I had woken up, and that I had noticed him out there. Trying to make as little movement as possible, I simply reached over to my backpack. I had a fillet knife there that I used to prepare fish from the creek. Slowly, bringing the backpack closer to me, I reached in, and as quiet as I could, extracted the knife from inside of it. I kept glancing back over the shadow to see if it had moved or not, but it hadn't. I guess on some level that was comforting because he hadn't noticed that I was up or moving. I lay there for God knows how long, in the dark, holding that fillet knife close to me. I kept waiting to see that stranger, what he was going to do. He just kept by the fire, and I assume occasionally looking over at the tent. Perhaps he was expecting me to get up or something like that. I don't really know. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was nothing. Perhaps it was just the owner of the property, and he was waiting for me to get up and tell me to get off of his land. But that didn't make much sense to me. If he wanted me gone, he would have woken me up. But also, if he was there to kill me, maybe he would have woken me up too. Finally he did something, but it wasn't something I wanted to see. I watched as the man stood up and he walked over to the tent. He stopped when he got close to the door flap of the tent. I felt my heart begin to beat really fast. I slowly moved my hand, holding the knife close to me, but in such a way that I could strike if the guy opened my tent and attacked me. But instead, he just stood there in front of the tent. I could feel him looking at me through the tent, even though I knew that he really wasn't. It was creepy and weird and very uncomfortable. After I don't know how long, he finally moved away, but rather than sit back in front of the fire, the man walked out of sight. I had no idea where he went, but I was not prepared to go back to sleep. I had no idea if he was hanging out in the woods, waiting for me to start snoring or something. I couldn't go back to sleep. All I could do was wait until morning, and the moment day broke, I packed up my camp and ended my camping trip early. I was shaken at the time, but nothing bad happened. I now only camp in places that I am allowed to be in. Number 3. The Watching. By the time I pulled into what I thought would be a safe place to camp, it was almost entirely dark. I'd start the day just south of Monterey, where the first thing in the morning, I was greeted by a humpback calf, breaching the surface just below my campsite and on the cliffs near Carmel, California. Setting off on my 5th day out from San Francisco, I imagined that I was continuously followed, or perhaps I did the following, by La Niña, where it would rain day after day, and usually all night long for weeks at a time. It was mid-January, so the cold, wet California nor'wester was in effect, and together they made the conditions much more dangerous and unpredictable. I'd heard that a quarter-mile section of highway I had washed off into the Pacific Ocean the year before, and was still under construction, but that was still days away from where I was then, and another story entirely. Because I bicycled about 150 miles that day, with intermittent tail and headwind gusts up to 50 knots, I considered myself lucky. When I found what I thought would be the perfect place, the ground receded into the cliffs just east of Highway 1, and was surrounded on 3 sides, so the air was mostly calm, and visibility was nearly certain. It looked like the perfect place for a one-night stay. I had all the necessary gear, Gore-Tex bivy, an F-down bag, one of the new Univega touring bikes with everything, and what I considered to be most important, a vision-inspired power food diet I dreamt while doing a 5-week survival in Yosemite. But that's another story. The time of year and weather along the Pacific coast meant night came early and morning came late, so I had to pitch my camp as quickly as possible. I remember feeling all at once both exhilarated and leery. I remember standing completely still, squinting my eyes and scanning everything around me. I extended myself as far and wide as I could, and soon enough discovered the cause of my weariness. We've all had that feeling where one minute you're doing something nonchalant, and the next you're turning around and looking directly into the eyes of someone behind you. I never did see anyone, but from what I could see, I discovered a large house just above me. It was 2 stories high, and stretched out precariously along a cliff edge, with what looked like multiple rooms and windows, but no lights. It looked as though it was either vacant or abandoned. What was particularly odd was that whenever I would catch myself looking too long, trying to discern even the slightest movement, I was left with the most sickening dread. Someone, or something, was telling me I wasn't supposed to look. I remembered reading once, "He who looks is also seen." Completing my setup, the rain falling even heavier, I pulled everything in, locked the bicycle to a support loop on the tent, stripped, crouched down on all fours into a kind of finger toe hold, then performed a head tuck, rolling upside down onto my back, and then folding myself into a closed jackknife, and then extending myself the length of the bivy. Gregor will have been jealous. Because of the gusts of rain, I closed everything up quickly and fell instantly into a deep, dreamless sleep. I can still hear the soft sound of the rain on the Gore-Tex, the pitch dark, the low hum of the surf. Sometime later, I got out, buck naked, but warm as toast, and into a driving nor'wester. I had to piss like a greyhound, whip it like a whippet, and the ice started to rain with intermittent flashes of lightning that lit up the surrounding area and far out to the sea. Turning my back to the gale, I examined the house on the cliff edge. The flashes showed what looked like a three-dimensional, black and white, stock photo out of a low-budget B-movie, when a new realization unexpectedly ran over me. I wasn't alone. No, I didn't yell out the proverbially lame B-movie query, "Is anyone there?" I just stood, completely still, and reached out into the dark with my entire self, to anything and everything around me, but there was nothing. Whatever it was had either gone or was hidden. I imagined it was shy or afraid to face me, show itself. Whatever was in the house on the cliff edge never did show itself, but was somehow still there, watching. I imagined what it might be thinking. The rest of the night was fitful at best. The rain and wind changed direction and began buffeting my little shelter, threatening to blow me out of my smug little cove, across Highway 1 and off of the cliff into the rolling Pacific. At times it was like I would just start to doze, and something would suddenly startle me, like my mind was trying to fall asleep, but my body kept saying no. Eventually, after 4 or 5 rounds of that, I decided that because I wasn't going to get any sleep anyway, I would just lay there and listen, and feel and think. Thinking, I managed to locate where I was at, the top right corner window, looking both down and out over the vast Pacific Ocean. It seemed to be emitting feelings of both calm, alarm, and sadness. It seemed to be waiting, but waiting for what or whom? I imagined it seemed to be waiting. I imagined it thin and fleeting and female. I called out with my mind that I meant it no harm. Silently I spoke to the powers that be to watch over and protect me. Some hours later, the wind and rain had stopped, and I heard a foghorn somewhere along the shelf overlooking the sea. I got out, to find myself blanketed by the densest fog I'd ever seen. The sky had cleared enough to look straight up and see Orion and the constellation Lepus, the rabbit, and just approaching the western horizon sat a faint, pale, nearly full moon. The light allowed me to see that the entire area was covered in a thick white fog. I watched it slowly rising along the shelf, across the highway over me, and up the cliff to the surrounding foothills. It was eerily beautiful and magically surreal, because I was used to getting up in the middle of the night when I was on the out, as I called it. I didn't think twice about walking around with just my boots on. With the fog, I was practically clothed, and since no one was out who was probably alive anyway, no one would care. I tied my climber's rope to the bike, which was hooked to the tent around my waist, and walked slowly in the direction of where the foghorn sounded. I had to go slow and feel my way. The fog was so thick. As I moved, the sound, at times, seemed further away, yet, somehow, I knew I was getting closer because the composition of the terrain underfoot had changed. It was increasingly smoother, flatter, and sandier. When I bumped into a large metal object, slimy with salt and condensation, and vibrating like a generator, I knew I'd arrived. I walked part way around to the front and was met with the most ear-shattering noise, but when I retreated to the back, it was like hearing a long, low, muffled tone. For some time I just stood there, engulfed by the cloud, listening to the sound and thinking about the house on the cliff. I must have been out there for the better part of an hour, standing motionless, watching the fog and its seeming sentience swirling, moving, and later being shoved by the over-encroaching, cold northwest wind back up into the surrounding hill. leaving me a little sad and alone. I no longer needed the climber's rope to find my way back. The rest of the night I kept waking up over and over with the weirdest feeling, as though I was getting sick. My mind was keenly aware of my surroundings, but this time my body was hurting by something or someone invisible to either sight or sound. It was like parts of me were being attacked, struck or hit over and over again, and sometimes by more than one. It drained me to the extent that I passed out multiple times, only to wake up feeling utterly spent, exhausted, or sick. Reflexively, I would examine my body with both hands, trying to detect any kind of injury or mark, something that might tell me what was happening to me, but there was nothing. If it hadn't been for the morning, though blowing and raining again, I'm not sure I would have been able to get out of there when I did. I managed to ride for only a couple of hours, barely able to stay in the saddle, when a local motel magically presented itself. I slept for almost 40 hours. When I woke, I had the most ravenous appetite. I stayed for 3 days and nights, eating, drinking, sleeping, watching cable television, and sighting humpbacks and sea otters playing in the kelp. I counted myself lucky, blessed to still be alive. Whatever it was that wanted me more, I wanted it. I read somewhere, from the moment we are born, we are dying. It is for each of us to decide when that will be. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.